So maybe it started out with a nagging cough, turned into a low-grade fever. Cough got a little bit deeper. Fever continued to rise as breathing became even more labored. And they tried everything to get the fever under control, damp towels, cool water, anything to get him to feel better. He wouldn't eat. He stopped drinking anything. He became lethargic. They called in the doctors. The doctors said, there's nothing we can do for him. And they knew if nothing changed, then Lazarus was going to die. At some point, one of the sisters probably said, somebody go get Jesus. And they found maybe a family member, maybe a close friend, somebody who could run fast and run really far because Jesus was about 20 miles away. And so the person takes off running and goes and finds Jesus. And in the meantime, Mary and Martha's home has become a waiting room. You ever wondered why we call people that find themselves in the hospital patients? Have you ever thought about that? Like, that is probably the worst term that we could have ever created to refer to somebody who is stuck in the hospital. Because if you've ever spent any time in the hospital, if you've had a family member that's been in the hospital, if you've ever just gone to visit somebody in the hospital, you have everything but patience. I like to think we should probably call those people that are in the hospital irritable or something like that, because patience is the one thing you don't have. And the patience of Mary and Martha was definitely running out. And at some point, the family member, the friend, comes running back through the door alone. And you can hear their conversation. Where's Jesus? Well, did you find him? Did you tell him what was wrong? Did you tell him it was Lazarus? Does he understand that he doesn't have much longer? Well, is he coming? What did he say? I don't know. It's a challenging story. And when you read verse 5 of John 11, it says Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. And so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed where he was 2 days longer. And sometimes you read the Bible, I hope you read the Bible like this, and you go, what? You see, sometimes we can just be guilty of just kind of reading through the story, and we're like, yeah, Jesus loved Mary and Martha. He loved them so much, he stayed where he was. That's not what you would have expected it to read. You would expect it to read, as soon as he heard, because he loved them, he sprinted all the way back, all 20 miles. He pulled up some kind of God-man strength that allowed him to run almost a marathon faster than anybody in the planet, or he used his superpowers and just transported right there and appeared right in the room and he healed him. But that's not what he does, because he doesn't always do what we expect him to do. Let me ask you this. What do you do when Jesus doesn't do what you thought he was going to do? What do you do when Jesus doesn't do what you thought he was going to do? It's a challenging question. And for Mary and Martha, they thought Jesus was going to come. I mean, Jesus had spent so much time with this family. If he was in or around Jerusalem, their little house was only a little over 1.5 miles away, and so oftentimes he would stay at their house. He would travel back. He ate so many meals around their table. He had so many jokes told around their couch. He slept in their guest room all the time. I mean, if there was a family on this planet, aside from his own, that Jesus was close to, it was Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And there was this expectation that when Lazarus got sick and when things turned south, that Jesus would get there. He healed all kinds of people. He healed random strangers. They weren't strangers to Jesus. He knew them all by name. But he healed all kinds of people that most of them didn't even know. People with different kinds of sicknesses and infirmities. And certainly Jesus will come and heal Lazarus. But he didn't. And they waited. And they waited. And they became more and more frustrated. I learned about this thing a couple of years ago called the frustration gap. It's really interesting. It's this space that's created when what you expect and what you experience don't match up. You ever gone to eat at a restaurant and you heard really good things about it, and maybe it's a steak place and they cook really good steak and they have really good service, and so your expectation are to get a fine piece of meat and to have great service and have a great dinner, but what you experience is they overcooked it. It was dry. It wasn't seasoned well. Your service was terrible. Your glass of your drink stayed empty for over half an hour. The waiter or waitress was kind of rude to you. And all of a sudden, you left there very frustrated. You see, what you expected and what you experienced did not match up. And that gap created is called frustration. And it's not just when you're at a restaurant. It's all phases of life. And especially when you start to deal with spiritual things, what you expect God to do and sometimes what He does are very different. And it can cause us to be frustrated. And Mary and Martha, we'll see in just a minute, are very, very frustrated because we all have to answer the question, what will you do when Jesus doesn't do what you expect Him to do? There's a couple stories in the Bible text that come to my mind. The first one is Job. If you've read the story of Job, it's 40-something chapters of just watching a man struggle. He loses his family, he loses all of his possessions, he loses his health, and he has no idea why. He has a couple of friends that come over to kind of grieve with him, and all they want to do is tell him he must have done something wrong. Job, you had to have done something wrong. There's nobody that's being punished like you unless you did something wrong. And he doesn't know, and he prays, and he's trying to petition before God, and he's struggling through, and finally God speaks. And God tells Job, there are things you could never understand. In the opening chapter of Job, he finds himself caught in a spiritual battle that he is not aware of, and he's the collateral damage. There's another text that comes to my mind. It's a short little book in the Old Testament. In fact, if you're not careful, you can just fly right past it. It's hard to find and it's hard to spell. It's the book of Habakkuk. You ever read Habakkuk? If not, it only take you about 20 minutes to read, and it's challenging. And in the opening chapter of Habakkuk, he asks God, why are you letting your people be so wicked? When are you going to punish Israel? And God says, well, that's a great time you asked, Habakkuk. I'm actually about to send the Babylonians to punish Israel. And Habakkuk says, the Babylonians, they're more wicked than any other nation on the planet. How are you going to use Babylon to punish your people? Shouldn't you be punishing Babylon? And then this little book closes with this reminder that God is in His holy temple, that all the earth keeps silent before Him. And it's just this reminder to you and I that sometimes there are things that are going on that we are not aware of, things that we cannot see. But yet sometimes we interpret the silence of God as the absence of God. And if we could see it, wouldn't change anything, and it would blow our minds, everything that is going on. But it's a struggle when you find yourself in the waiting room. In this story of John chapter 11, Jesus says something over and over again. He said He's doing what He's doing so that they would believe. Do you believe that God can use your struggle, your weaknesses, your pain to His glory? In 1 Peter and James and other places, he talks about how He always has a purpose from our pain. He will use it to teach us something. And He will always use our pain and our struggle to draw us closer to Him if we will allow Him to. And that's not easy to hear. It's not easy to experience. It's not easy to say, but it's true that sometimes God allows His children to suffer. Sometimes He allows His children to struggle, and we want it to go away. Just like every parent never wants to see their child struggle, but sometimes we have to allow our children to struggle. We have to allow them to make decisions and to deal with certain types of pain because we know that it will teach them something. We know that it will make them better. And they don't understand why, but we can, as a parent, understand. And when it comes to our relationship with God, it just becomes more complex. The pain that we deal with, the struggles that we have. Yet, as our loving Father, we're asked to answer the same question that Mary and Martha are being asked to answer. When Jesus doesn't do what you expected Him to do, will you trust Him? Will you trust Him? Will you believe in Him? Let's keep going in the text of John 11. It says, after this, He said to His disciples, hey, let's go to Judea again. And they're like, Rabbi, the Jews there were just about to stone you, and you're going to go back there. So last week we closed out John chapter 10, and in John chapter 10, they literally have rocks in hand. They're about to stone Him, but Jesus is able to get away. And the reason why they were about to stone Him is because He equated Himself to be on the same level as God the Father. The authority that God has, Jesus has. He says a phrase, He says, the Father and I are one. It's not just saying we're really tight with each other, we have a really good relationship, we talk all the time. He's saying we're on the same level. And they felt as though that was blasphemy. And they were about to stone Him. And because of that, Jesus has to leave. and he travels all the way back to the other side of the Jordan River, all the way back to where he first began his ministry, back to where John the Baptizer first baptized him. That was around 20 miles from the city of Jerusalem. He's got to get out of town because he knows conflict is coming. And when this messenger arrives with the news, Lazarus is sick, Jesus knows exactly what that means. You see, for him to go back to the home of Lazarus and to be about 1.5 miles or so outside of the city of Jerusalem means that as soon as he makes that decision, he will be on a direct course to the cross. Jesus knows that. He knows the conflict that is looming because there is a battle that is just on the horizon. The time is almost there. As we've gone through the Gospel of John, that's a phrase that we've heard over and over again. My time has not yet come. It's not my time. The hour had not yet come. And now all of a sudden, it's almost time. And in order for him to go back to the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, and in order for him to give Lazarus life, it's going to cost him his own. Is that not the story of the gospel? That when Jesus goes back to this little village and he walks into this home and Lazarus has been dead, and we'll look at that miracle next Sunday in its completion, but he raises Lazarus from the dead, it cost him his own life because from then on he's going to have to hide in the shadows, and in just a very short amount of time, he's going to ultimately give his life on the cross. This is the miracle that ultimately condemns him to death. And he knows there's a battle that's taking place. And we find ourselves caught up in the same spiritual battle. It's interesting that as the Apostle Paul is interpreting the death of Jesus, and he's thinking about how it connects and how Jesus is fighting this battle, and he's not fighting this spiritual battle with swords and soldiers, because he actually tells Peter in one account, put your sword away. That's not how this is going to go down. But rather, he's fighting this battle through surrender and through a cross and through offering love and forgiveness. And as he's fighting this battle, when Jesus wins the victory, it was a victory that nobody saw coming. I mean, it just blew everybody's mind that Jesus actually conquered death, because what they thought when he gave his life on the cross is they thought that was game over. That's the end of everything. Jesus lost, and there's the end. They could not see 3 days later that stone rolling away and him walking out of the tomb, conquering death. Because had that happened, none of it, had they known that's what was going to happen, none of it would have happened. And so the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians is thinking on this, and he says these words. He says, none of the rulers of this age understood any of this, because if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. What he means by rulers of this age is he's not just talking about the Roman authorities. He's not just talking about the Jewish leaders. He's talking about Satan himself. He's talking about this group of rebellious angels, demons, whatever you want to call them, that are operating in, around, and behind all of the systems of government and culture and corruption that's going on in our world right now, that Paul talks about in Ephesians chapter 6. Had they understood what was going to happen, if Satan himself had known that by allowing Jesus to go to the cross, it would ensure his own defeat, you think he would have allowed that? You see, the moment Jesus gave up his life and died on the cross, all of hell broke out in a celebration. They thought they won. Until that Sunday morning, when the stone rolled away and light peered into that dark tomb, and they realized they had lost. This is the kind of battle we find ourselves fighting. In Ephesians 6, Paul said, we're not fighting against flesh and blood. We're not fighting against human beings. We're fighting against rulers, principalities, powers of darkness. That's the battle that we find ourselves caught up in. And we can see glimpses of the battle that's taking place today, because it's not a battle that's being fought on a literal battlefield. It's not a battle that has literal soldiers going at one another with guns and missiles and all that. This is a spiritual battle, and it's a battle that we can see when we turn on TV or you flip on the news or you hear conversations taking place. It's a battle over truth. It's a battle over morality. It's a battle over identity, and it's being waged every day. And it's not just being waged against our young people. It's being waged against us older adults as well, as we're all challenged with the lie versus the truth, the kingdom of darkness versus the kingdom of light. And we can see this battle taking place. And just like Jesus went to war, not with a gun, not with a sword, he went to war with surrendering. He went to war with a cross. We're called to fight with peace. We're called to fight with prayer. We're called to fight with God's truth, and kindness. I mean, think about this now. Who shows up to a fight with peace? Who shows up to a fight going, no, I'm not going to exchange blows with you. I just want to pray with you. Who does that? Other than a follower of Jesus, whose life has been radically shaped by the story of Jesus. This is the battle that we find ourselves in. Just like with Jesus, seeing this conflict coming, we can see it every day. And it's a reminder that tomorrow morning when you get up and go to work, you get up and do what life has called you to do, it's a reminder that you're not just walking through life. You're in a fight. You're in a fight for your soul. And if you're a child of God, battle's already been won. We're just called to stand. Conflict is not only coming, but it's here. And we're called to stand for truth. I want to finish out this little text in John 11. We're not going to look at the whole story of the raising of Lazarus. I want to save part of that for next week. But Jesus came and he found Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. It's a question we have to ask. Why did Jesus wait 4 days to show up? Why does he wait till after Lazarus has been dead for 4 days? Well, there's this idea during that time that when a person died, their spirit would kind of hover over their body for around 2 to 3 days. But then after decomposition started to set in, the spirit would depart and go back to be with the Lord, and death had become final. And so when John tells you that Lazarus has been dead for 4 days, he wants you to know that Lazarus was like dead. Like this is a true miracle. There was no looking at this miracle and going, well, maybe his spirit was hovering. No. Signs of decomposing had already begun to take place. And when Jesus raises him from the dead, there is no denying this was nothing short of a miracle itself. And so Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. Many of the Jews had come to Mary and Martha to console them concerning their brother. So during that culture, you would have a group of people, friends, extended family, who would all come together, and for 7 days, they would just cry with you. Wherever you went, they would be with you. They never left you alone. If you were crying, they were crying. Whatever you were experiencing, they were experiencing with you. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained in the house. And Martha said, do you hear her frustration? Do you hear her grief spilling over? Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. If you had just made it here in time, you could have done something about it. And she says it tactfully. She says it with grace, but you can hear a tinge of an accusation or frustration that's coming out. Why didn't you get here? Why didn't you come in time? But even now I know whatever you ask, God will give you. Jesus said, Martha, your brother will rise again. I know he's going to rise again at the resurrection in the last day. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even though he dies, yet he will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I do believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. I want us to think about this question. Do you believe this? Over and over the last several months, kind of the thought we've come back to, and we're going to keep coming back to it because it's so important, is what does believe actually mean? It's not just something that locks into the mind. It's not just this mental exercise that your mind goes through of some thoughts that you know are accurate or are true. When Jesus says, do you believe this? Do you believe that I'm the resurrection and the life? Are you willing to surrender all of your trust? Are you willing to surrender all of your allegiance? Are you willing to live and act in a way that is different with this truth in mind? Are you willing to allow it to completely change who you are? I want us to think about this as we close out our message this morning. What does it mean in 2022 to be a Christian? What does it mean in America in 2022 to be a follower of Jesus? If we're honest, it means showing up to church every so often, semi-regularly, somewhat regularly. It means reading your Bible on occasion. It means giving some. It means doing some good things. It means kind of trying to a degree to not sin and not do those things. But if you do, it's okay. No judge. God will forgive. Everything's going to be good. That's kind of the concept of Christianity in America in 2022. But when you read through the New Testament, when you read through the book of Acts, the question that I ask over and over again is, why were they trying to kill those people? Why were they trying to put them to death? Why were they throwing Christians in jail? Why were they beating them? Why were they trying to silence them? Is it because they were too nice? Is it because they went to church too much? And I just stand before you to say, I don't think so. I don't think that their culture was bothered by the fact that they went to church too much. I would put before you that the reason why they were so bothered, the reason why they were trying to hush them, is not because they went to church too much, but because they were the church too much. It was a part of their identity. You couldn't get them to stop talking about the resurrection of Jesus. And their value system was so upside down from the world that it shook the whole culture. It shook the religious leaders. It shook the Romans. They knew something was different about this. You couldn't stop them. You threw them in jail. They just talked to the jailers and all the prisoners about who Jesus was and about the fact that the tomb was empty. You let them out and they're on the street corners. They are everywhere. You tried to squash their gathering and they just seem to multiply more and more and more, and you kick them out of their homes, you fire them from their jobs, and they just leave and they just go somewhere else, and they just start planting these little communities of Jesus followers, and they just talk about Jesus wherever they go, and whatever they could do, they could not get it to end. They could shut down the building, they could burn the building, they could do whatever they wanted to do, but it would not put an end to what these people were doing. And so kind of the question that I have to ask myself, that you and I have to ask, is there something different about being a follower of Jesus in the first century than it is in the 21st century? Because what I see is I see a gap. I see a difference here. So I remember when I was in college, I read this book that was assigned to me called Your God is Too Small by an author named J.B. Phillips. And when I bought the book, I was really excited because you remember when you were in college or high school and somebody assigned you a reading and they give you like a really fat book and you're like, oh man, this is going to take forever. This book was like that thick. I mean, it was super thin. It was only that tall. I mean, you can only put so many words on a page with that small of a book. And it was ironic that the small book was called Your God is Too Small. And after I got done reading, I thought, this book is too small. It was really, really good. I wish it had been about 10 times as long because I love what the author said. And one of his quotes says this: we may here point out the great difference that has come to exist between Christianity of the early days and that of today. To us, it has become a performance, a keeping of rules, while to the people of those days, it was plainly an invasion of their lives by a new quality of life altogether. This book was not written in the last 10 years. It's a relatively old book, but things haven't changed. For us, our faith system has kind of become a performance or a critique of a performance. We get in the car and we'll talk about how good or how much we enjoyed the service, whether it spoke to us or not, whether we liked the song choices or not, whether the prayer guy prayed over what we wanted him to pray over, whether he missed something, whether it went too long or it was too short, or preacher always preaches too long. That's just a given here. Sorry, folks, right? And it's kind of become, for many Christians, a critique of a performance, or how good did I do today? But I love his quote. I love that last little line. For those in the first century, second century, third century, it was plainly an invasion of their lives by this new quality of life altogether. And so what I want us to think this morning is, if you feel the tension, if you read through the book of Acts, and if you haven't done it recently, please start reading it today. If you read through the Gospels and you see that what you read is very different from what you experience, and it kind of leaves you frustrated, you have to ask the question, why is it so different? Have I not been fully invaded by the gospel of Jesus Christ? If my life is not looking like the faith that they exhibited then, why is that? I so appreciated Steve's class this morning talking about agape, and he showed this video, and in the video of some foster parents that they have, the young lady in the video talked about how faith is a risk, how it's stepping out and it's taking a little bit of a risk before God. And the beauty is that God is there all the time. It's not just a blind step of faith. It's just a logical step of trusting who God is. But there is a risk element involved in living the gospel of Christ. And if we have zero risk involved in followers of Jesus, then maybe it is that our following of Jesus is not as invaded by the gospel as we thought it was. I want us to think this morning about what does it mean for your life to be invaded. And I don't just mean that we give any kind of lip service, because it's easy to say, yeah, I've given my whole heart to Jesus. We got to look deeper than that. It's not just about convincing yourselves of some different truths. It's about looking at your checking account. It's about looking at your calendar. It's about looking at how you utilize your gifts. It's about looking at what dominates your thoughts during your free time. I'm not saying we can't have hobbies. I'm not saying we can't go on vacation. I'm not saying we're not here to enjoy life, because we are. God has blessed us with many good things. But are we utilizing all of those opportunities? Is our mind saturated and dominated by the kingdom of God, by our relationship with Him? Has He fully invaded our life? Paul said in Philippians chapter 1, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death, because to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I'm honest with you, sometimes when I read that statement, and if I were to say it myself, I'd have to put something else there instead of Christ. For to me, to live is, sometimes it's family. For me to live is vacation. For me to live is my hobbies. For me to live is a relationship. For me to live is my job. For me to live is the goals and dreams that I've set for my life. Retirement, materialism. For me to live is, it can be a number of things other than Jesus. It's only when a person has fully surrendered their heart to Christ, has fully devoted their life to Him, that you can actually say, to me, to live is Christ. Whatever happens in this body will result in the glory of God. What a statement. I don't know about you, I want to make that statement today. And not just make it with my mouth, I want my life to be like that. To say, to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. You see, you've got to answer the question, what are you going to live for? And what are you willing to die for? That's the question you've got to answer. It's the same question that Jesus asked Martha and Mary. Do you believe this? Do you believe? Do you believe that Jesus is the Christ? And by that He is your Savior. Do you believe that Jesus conquered the grave? I firmly believe that as followers of Jesus, we've got to get back to being the church. Not just people who go to church, but people who are the church. People who have become a movement, on the go all the time. That's the point of our gathering. It's not just to come here and to make each other feel kind of better about ourselves and to check some things off a list so that if our life were to come to an end today, we've done enough good so that God will give us a thumbs up instead of the thumbs down. That's not Christianity. Jesus died and redeemed your soul. You can't earn an ounce of God's goodness. There's no good work you can do to turn God's thumb up or down. He saved you by grace through faith. You're called to surrender your life to Him, be baptized into Jesus, and live faithfully. And so we've got to get back to being this movement. It's people who are on the go, on mission all the time, gathering to go. We got to get back to being a hospital where we're not shocked by brokenness. Could you imagine walking through the hospital and going, why are all these sick people here? Why are you have a broken leg? Why are you here? Well, you're here because this is the place you go when you're broken. We got to make sure that that's our identity as a church. We're a place for the broken, where someone can come in with a completely shattered life. And we go, you too? Come on. Me too. Come join the party. A bunch of broken people celebrating healing. You see, we have the great physician on our side. This is a place for the broken. We got to get back to being an army of followers of Jesus, because we are in a battle. We're not fighting with physical weapons. We're fighting with the virtues that surround this auditorium that are written on the wall. Fighting with peace and prayer, love and compassion. We're fighting for light, for truth, for love. And we're fighting in a battle that's already been decided. We're just called to stand. We've got to get back to being an army. We've got to be people whose identity, whose convictions are shaped by an empty tomb. That's what made those early followers of Jesus different than what we see in Christianity in a large scope today. their convictions, their whole identity was shaped by the fact that the tomb was empty. Jesus was raised, and there was nothing you could do to take life from them. They were willing to give it. They were willing to offer theirs up. They were willing to say whatever needed to be said, do whatever needed to be done in order for more people to know that Jesus is victorious. He is alive, and He is our Lord. That's what it means to be set free. That's what it means for Jesus to be the resurrection and the life. And so I ask you, as Jesus is asking me, do you believe this? If today you want to become a follower of Jesus, you want to be baptized into Christ, we'd love to assist you with that, encourage you, and celebrate with you today so that you can experience new life. If you need to have a moment of rededication, you want to pray with one of our shepherds, you want to pray with somebody here today, you need to have a moment where you are to just kind of put away the fluff and really refocus your heart back onto Him and make a promise to God today that you want to surrender your life to Him. Yeah, you were baptized, but man, life just kind of gets crazy and it pulls your heart away from Him, and you want to bring your heart back to Christ and you want to resurrender your life today. Do that. Take that step of faith, whatever God is calling you. If we can help you in any way, let us know as we stand and sing.